Very excited to be talking with you all today, and we have wonderful presenters and panelists for today's webinar. We've been partners with North Texas Municipal Water Districts for a long time, and we're excited to partner with them to bring you this 4-part webinar series called Conservation the Texas Way. And over the last year, we've talked about water quality, water conservation best practices, water rights and planning, Texas land trends, green infrastructure, Texas Forest Service, turf grass, lots of different things. And you can see all of those recordings on either North Texas Municipal Water District or Texas Nature's YouTube channels. And today we're going to end our webinar series talking about some of the things that make our state so special, land and plants, water, and wildlife. Today's presenters will be Andrea DeLong-Amaya. She is the Director of Horticulture at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. Melissa Felty, Conservation Education Manager at Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. And Ben Jones, Executive Director at Texas Conservation Alliance. And before we move on to presentations, we're going to share a trailer for Texas's newest wildlife documentary that has been playing on movie screens since June 3rd. Hopefully you got to see it on the big screen, but if not, it is coming to Apple TV, Google Play, and Amazon Prime today. So super excited about that. TxN Nature is proud to be the primary partner for the film, and we thought it'd be the perfect way to start today's webinar, just to showcase just Texas's natural resources and highlight the diversity coming from across our 11 distinct ecoregions in Texas, from the coast to the piney woods and the panhandle to our mountains out in West Texas in the Big Bend region. So I'm going to start by sharing that video, just 1 second, and then we'll move on to the presentations.
Texas is a land of mystery and legend, incredibly vast and diverse. It's where the Rocky Mountains give way to the Great Plains, and where the forests of the Deep South converge with the Blackland Prairie. From the spring-fed rivers that bless the hill country to the tropical forest of the Rio Grande Valley, Texas gives life to animals found nowhere else and attracts migrations from across the hemisphere. From our headwater springs to the Gulf of Mexico, it is a land sculpted by water, where nature has selected for the most adaptable, and to those willing to stake their claim. For the very first time, this film will celebrate the natural wonders of Texas. It is a story about tragedies in our past, of recoveries against all odds, and is a call to action to conserve the wildlife and wild places in our home. This is a story for all who love Texas.
Alrighty. Well, to kick it off, I'm going to pass it over to Andrea.
Hello. Let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here, if I can find where my cursor is. There we go. All right. Are you seeing my screen? All right, very good. Well, that was really beautiful footage. I have not seen the video yet, and I cannot wait to see it. It looks amazing. Quite a teaser. So thank you for having me. I'm really honored to be here today. I'm Andrea DeLong-Amaya, and I'm the Director of Horticulture at the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. And I want to talk about how using native plants can support the conservation of our land, the water and the wildlife that all of that supports. I like to figure out how to advance my slides. There we go. I like to start with this quote by Mrs. Johnson, who was one of our co-founders of the Wildflower Center. "The environment is where we all meet, where we all have a mutual interest. It's the one thing that all of us share. Not only is it a mirror of ourselves, but it's a focusing lens on what we can become." We are who we are. We are the Botanic Garden of Texas. We're part of the University of Texas as an organized research unit. We have sustainable public gardens that feature Texas native plants. And as a public garden, we feature education and outreach programs, and we have a relatively new science and conservation department as well. We are located in South Austin on about 284 acres. And of that, about 9 acres are cultivated gardens, and then another 16 acres of that is our tree collection in the Arboretum. We have more than 970 taxa from different parts of the state. We focus on Central Texas because that's where we're located, but we collect everything from the whole state. And we boast the most diverse collection of Texas native plants in North America. So what we do, we are inspiring the conservation of native plants. We use the term native plant a lot, and I think a lot of times we don't really stop to think about what it actually means. And so I'm going to attempt to give some more specificity to that. It's a pretty complicated topic, but I think this is a pretty reasonable shorthand to say that it's a plant that occurs naturally where it evolved. Having said that, I think there's some other qualifications that I'd like to make, and one of them is about geography. It's really important to have a geographical qualifier. For example, if you went to a garden center and said, I would like to get some native plants, they might ask, are you looking for things that are native to North America or Texas? If you're working on a restoration project, maybe you want to be even more specific and really narrow it down to your drainage. I want plants that are native to the Bull Creek drainage. So it depends on what your goals are for why you want to use native plants. And what kind of geographic range you're looking at. Another category of plants that are often confused as being natives are things that you might find in the wild. And these are plants that have escaped cultivation or have been either intentionally or maybe accidentally introduced. We consider these plants invasive exotics. They're plants that are not native, that have really become out of balance and pushed out native vegetation. This obviously is going to diminish the habitat value for wildlife if we don't have the rich diversity of native plants that we normally would have. And also there are lots of agricultural and economical problems related to invasive species. So that's one thing that might fool you. Another category of plants that are commonly thought of as being in native plants is a category that I consider well adapted non-natives or exotics that are well adapted. And these are heat tolerant plants, they are drought tolerant, but that doesn't mean that they're native to the state. And that might be all right with you depending on what your goals are for your landscape, but just to be aware that not all well adapted plants are actually native. And then the last category, if you buy a packet of wildflower seeds, you might assume that wildflowers are going to be native plants, but you might be getting some of these Eurasian species. And again, that's not necessarily bad as long as there are not invasive species in the mix. One thing to look out for is oxeye daisy, for example, which commonly you might get in a seed mix, but those do become invasive. So just to be aware, here's some common things there. So why should you want to be using native plants in your garden? As I just talked about, that will help eliminate the potential for introducing invasive exotics. It's a wonderful way to preserve regional identity. And if you've selected the right plants for the right location, you can really use a lot less water, which is driving a lot of reasons why people are using native plants. You can also eliminate or at least reduce your need for soil amendments and fertilizers. Native plants in general are going to be more disease and pest resistant. Using native plants is going to be the best way to attract a diversity of wildlife. And using native plants is a wonderful way to connect with the natural world, and it's a gesture of regard and reverence for those plants and our natural heritage. So I have a quiz for you. I'm curious if you guys know what caterpillar, what kind of butterfly this caterpillar turns into, and you can drop that into the Q&A, and at the end of my talk, I'll answer that question. It's a little bit tricky. but maybe something fun. So if you come out to the Wildflower Center, you might see something like this. This might be what you're expecting to see at the Wildflower Center, right? And we certainly have gardens that look like this, particularly in the springtime. This is a wildflower meadow, and it's actually a cultivated garden, even though it might not come across as that. Here's another example of a naturalistic landscape using native plants. And I think a lot of people assume that if you're going to use native plants, that your garden has to look naturalistic or maybe even messy. And a well-tended, well-designed garden shouldn't look messy necessarily to most people. But I also want to really enforce that just because you're using native plants in landscape doesn't mean that you have to have a naturalistic looking garden. You can use a similar, our native plant palette and get a very different style based on how you design the space and how your maintenance is. So in this image, you can see we've used some geometric shapes and some symmetry, the shearing of the shrubs and keeping the grass cut. Those are all things that are going to keep that landscape looking more on a formal garden. And here's another example of maybe a more romantic style garden. So just because you want to use native plants shouldn't be I mean, if you want to have a formal or a stylized garden, that shouldn't eliminate you from using native plants in your landscape. We have a whole selection of different water features that are wonderful for providing habitat for wildlife. It also allows us to grow different species of plants that we might not be able to grow in drier situations. We have native fish. That waterfall is a wonderful bird bath. We have garter snakes and ribbon snakes and turtles and all kinds of wildlife that love to come to our water sources. And this is an image of our insectary, which is part of our pollinator garden, where we raise caterpillars into butterflies and moths. And then because they're all native species, we don't need to have permits and we can release them directly back out into the garden. And that's a way to raise those populations and keep them protected from predators. And then for human wildlife, I also like to really emphasize that we have a lot of cool native plants that are very delicious and nutritious to eat. And here's some examples of some of those plants that we feature in our Taste of Place garden. We're also known as an organization that employs a lot of sustainable methods, and we're very well known for the extensive rainwater harvesting system that we have. At the time when we were built, we had the largest rainwater harvesting system in North America. And I'm glad to say that now other people have surpassed us, but we do, in addition to rainwater harvesting, we do other sustainable features like the photovoltaic solar panels. When we built the family garden, which is pictured here, we did all kinds of things, including salvaging the stonework, the stone that came out of the ground, that big boulders. So instead of taking it to the dump or having to buy new rocks, we just use what we had on site and being resourceful in that regard. We've also done a lot of research on green roofs, and obviously using native plants on a green roof is a wonderful way to bring native plants into an urban environment, which definitely enhances wildlife habitat. I just heard a TED Talk yesterday on the radio that talked about exactly this thing, that actually there's quite a bit of diversity in urban settings, particularly with bees. And so providing some plants for them to use is a wonderful way to encourage them, all kinds of animals. Green roofs also help with slowing down stormwater, and that helps with mitigating downstream flash flooding. A green roof will help insulate a building, which is going to help with energy conservation. As the plants transpire, they're also cooling off the environment. Plants sequester carbon, they filter particulate matter from polluted air. They're providing oxygen. If you happen to be able to look out over a green roof, it's a nice aesthetic amenity as well. So the next section I want to just briefly introduce with this quote by Aldo Leopold. We abuse land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see the land as a community to which we belong, we may begin to use it with love and respect. It's very interesting to note that about 1/3 of the water used in residential water usage is actually put onto landscapes. So the more we can conserve the amount of water we're using on our landscapes will really make a big dent in our overall water use. This image shows you a range on the right side of this, I'm sorry, on the left side of the screen, what a healthy vegetated landscape will do in terms of helping with reducing runoff and also with infiltration into the soil. And then compare and contrast that with, on the right side of the screen, what a city would do. And you can see that there's really quite a range in how effective those landscapes are. And even an agricultural space is not going to be as effective as a healthy landscape would be. So if you're at home, you could do something like a rain garden. And a rain garden is just simply a depressed area in the landscape where water flows during a rain event. And it's designed to slow down the water infiltration and keep the water on your property, and it helps with recharging the groundwater. It also can help with filtering any impurities that you would have on that runoff water. And then you'd want to select plants that are adapted to having seasonal poor drainage. For example, we have the Gulf Muley in this picture with the big, beautiful pink flowers. There's bald cypress and dwarf palmetto. Those are all great plants that could be used in a rain garden. Here we have plants, this is giant coneflower with the yellow flowers and the gray foliage, and you can see they're planted in a swale here, and we're taking advantage of that natural topography in the landscape to be able to use different kinds of plants that will take those moisture conditions. So using native plants is going to help you really be able to respond to your landscape and use less water if you select them properly. So how can you get involved and learn more about using native plants? The first thing I'll say is to please come visit us at the Wildflower Center. We're beautiful year round. If you can, use native plants in your own landscapes. We also have a robust curriculum of different classes, and you can check our website to see what classes are coming up. In October, I'll be teaching a couple classes on plant selection. We also have a very robust database on our website that gives you all sorts of information about plants. This is covering plants all over North America, so not just Texas. You can type in a name and get an encyclopedic set of information for whatever plant that you've selected in there, or you can do a combination search to help identify something that you don't know what it is. And you have growing information, lots of images, so it's a really useful tool. So check that out. We also use volunteers all the time. We really love our volunteers. So that's another really great way to get involved. And you get to learn a lot and build community with like-minded people. And also become a member. Members obviously can receive free admission into the Wildflower Center. We have reciprocal benefits with other gardens throughout the United States and abroad. You also will receive a magazine that has all kinds of information about native plants and fascinating document. So in conclusion, let me just say this quote from David Frost, who's a member of the California Native Plant Society. This is how we make our gardens here. These are the plants that tell us we are home. And then one final quote from Mrs. Johnson. Wherever I go in America, I like it when the land speaks its own language in its own regional accent. And check out our Wildflower Center website. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. Native plants are so important, and to reiterate, please check out the Wildflower Center if you haven't seen it. It's one of my favorite spots in Austin as well. And if you have any questions about the Wildflower Center or native plants, please drop them in the Q&A and we'll get those answered at the end. I know a few of you did answer Andrea's question about the caterpillar. I did try to respond to those in the Q&A, so that was a queen butterfly caterpillar. So tricky one there because they look similar to monarch caterpillars. Next speaker is Melissa. Take it away.
Thank you. To share. And do you see the presentation?
Yes.
Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Melissa Felty. I'm the Conservation Education Manager with Texas Parks and Wildlife. And the one thing is that water connects Texas. So that's the main thing with all of us here learning about water and all the speakers all around Texas. Let's see. So Texas Parks and Wildlife, their mission, the main thing is to manage and conserve the natural and cultural resources of Texas for our generation and for future generations. Now, a lot of the things that I'm going to be showing you here today are all resources. So we have with TPWD, we have about 3,000 employees. all instrumental with water. And so whether it goes down to human resources, our finance department, our purchasers, all the way to the people, the biologists, the fisheries, coastal and inland, we all play a role in the team of TPWD. So some of the programs I'm going to show as well too, the project's aim is to inform and educate the citizens of Texas about our most precious resource, which is water. So you're going to see there's going to be ones that align with conservation. And so in the lower left-hand corner, you'll see that I have links. Those are all links to the TPWD website. And then some of them may have a second link on that green bar at the bottom. Those are external to TPWD that are linked within. So this one is the TPWD resources is about aquatic species and conservation. So when you go to the main TPWD website, there'll be a toolbar across the top, and there's one specifically for water. So if you click on that, all of these aquatic species conservation links will come up. So I'm showing you whether you're inland and you have fresh water, whether you're along the edge in estuaries or coastal waters, we connect to water. So there's the abandoned track removal program. So you'll see that's one of the pictures there. And then the environmental flow information toolkit. That's an amazing toolkit that was finalized. And so we have river studies. So even a lot of people ask, I remember when I was young and there used to be a plentiful of fish. It used to be not polluted. Now that's not the case. What can be done? And so we have a river studies program that those inquiries can go out to as well. So a lot of good links and resources there. And then in that same link, under the water tab, there's environmental concerns. So we go out and if there's any, the CAST, kills and spills team, they'll go out and assess it. Nuisance vegetation. So that's Andrea was talking about the difference between native, non-native, and even aggressive, invasive, and things like that. So nuisance vegetation, and invasive species. So this is the one you'll see that there's a Texas invasive invasive.org there's an aquatic section. So you can go and you can look all about those zebra mussels, the lionfish that you see there as well too. And that's what I'm going to be talking about is the state of the water. So the state of the water, that one you'll see it's Texas, the state of the water.org. And that one, what that one offers is there's a magazine. They're a little bit older, but it was a decade of July's issues was designated just to water. And so there's a lot of schools that are still using this. So if you're a teacher out there, if you want to use this for kids to learn all about the different water issues, habitats, types of aquatic systems that we have, you can use that. Then there's Wildscape Your Yard. Andrea talked a lot about that, but it's how to transition to native, care for your trees, firescaping, which is really important, and watering benefits. The one I'm going to talk about a little bit more is how to reduce your water bill. This one's really important, and people are like, give me some good stuff. I hear that all the time. Getting to the good stuff is really, we need to, people are like, I don't want to hear of turn your faucet off when you're drinking the water or when you're brushing your teeth. But that's actually one of, if we start simple, there's about 57 billion people. Of those, there's some children, the children keep their water on. And so even if we have that one simple basic practice, we can be saving millions of gallons of water every single day. So there's a section there, reduce your water bill. And so going out and doing, you can type in an internet search of water calculator, finding out what your actual water use is, doing your own research in your own property to make a difference. The other thing is talking with some, this weekend, I was at a conference and I was talking with some real estate developers that are conservation minded, and they brought up a really good point. Right now we're in a drought. A lot of people know that. There's going to be conservation efforts all around the world or around Texas that we're like level 1, you can only water your lawn 1 day a week. Well, that's great, but your HOA is going to tell you that you need to have a green lawn, you're going to get fined. And so one of the programs later on I'm going to be mentioning is a Texas Water Specialist So just reaching out in how to reduce your water bill and your water footprint where you are and in your community. So going, if you live in an HOA, reaching out to your HOA and saying, hey, we need to do some things. We can't have green, lush lawns in the middle of a drought. You can't be finding residents for that kind of stuff. So being the advocate in your community is really important. And then helping wildlife as well too. The drought is happening. There's a lot of fires that are happening. I believe it was just outside of Fort Worth. There was a 2,500 acre fire. They believe it started from a welder, a spark from somebody welding. So it's just one of those things. Be conscious of what you're doing, what your actions are, because water levels are really low right now. And with wildlife, if you have the capability, put some kind of water source out there, help them out, because they may not, their normal water access may be all dried up. So provide water for them, but just make sure you don't feed wildlife. So then we go to stewardship. So with stewardship, this is the Texas Waters Program. With the Texas Waters Program, it's a voluntary program that has a curriculum. And so you can get the curriculum, Texas Water, Exploring Waters and Watersheds. You can either get that online, or we do have hard copy that we can send. It's 9 chapters that covers, those are just a couple of the ones that you're seeing there: aquatic habitats and their species, the watershed's role, natural flow, and the last chapter, chapter 9, is Texas water law. We also have Google quizzes that assist with getting the certification. We have webinars, and the webinars go all the way from water law to agricultural planning. Donna Work, which is on here, she's with the Forestry Service, so she talks about best management practices to reduce that runoff, especially sedimentation into our waterways. And it's a variety of aquatic based, and we go all the way from agricultural to the tip, all the way to, we had an artificial reef program by Allison Baldwin with TPWD. So we do freshwater, we do coastal, we had karst with our January. So we try to cover all the different types of aquatic ecosystems. There's Texas Waters Day. That one is right before the Master Naturalist annual meeting. So you can attend that, whether you're a Master Naturalist or not, you can still attend that. And then partner organizations to just like this. So Texan by Nature is one of our wonderful partners. And this training would count. So if you're out there, if you're a water specialist, or if you're looking at being a water specialist, this presentation, because it is water and aquatic based, it does count for your towards your advanced training. So this is what you need. There's the aquatic subjects are conservation, ecology, education, and stewardship. And that's with your advanced training. So you need to get at least 8 hours of advanced training, and it keeps your certification at least 10 hours of aquatic based volunteer service. So the conservation is just going to be if you are in an area and you're learning about, Andrea mentioned it, bioswales. That's really good. So the bioswales and learning how to do that. Ecology, that's going to be species identification. Education is if you're going and representing and being a water ambassador at festivals and things like that. And then stewardship, doing the riparian restorations and going out there and actually doing the pulling and trash pickup. So if you're canoeing, kayaking, and you're picking up trash while you're doing that, that's considered volunteer service. So if you have the last slide, I'll have my contact information, or you can just type in TPWD water specialist, Texas water specialist, or there's the website that's down on the bottom as well too. And let's go to education. So with TPWD, what we have is we have the Texas Aquatic Science curriculum. That is a middle school, high school curriculum. All of it is TxN aligned. So if you have a middle schooler or high schooler that is interested in this, please reach out to the school to have this curriculum put into their school, into their lesson plans, because it's Texas based. It's great that they learn about the rainforest and stuff as well too, and how to protect that. But let's talk about the aquatic systems that are in their backyard, and how to protect that as well too. If you are a nature center, an organization out there, and I saw on the list some of you that are attending are one of our Texas Aquatic Science certified field sites. So if you lead any aquatic based field trips, you can become a certified field site and be on our website and get some awesome supplies as well too. For the Texas Aquatic Science, we do have aquatic science educator trainings that are held yearly. And what I'm actually asking, if there's any volunteers out there that like to make short videos, We are in need of that because all the activities, we're making a new teacher ebook and student handbook. And the videos are about 2 to 20 minutes. You can see that there's a couple examples there. So if you're interested and need some volunteer hours, reach out. I can help do that where you're in your own community and using your equipment. Other water education opportunities, we have the TPW Discover, that is our distance learning. We have a YouTube channel that is TPWD Discover, as well as we have an education YouTube channel, and then social media platforms. And then recreation. So where's the water? Where's the water is around here. And this is also on the water portion of our tab. We have Texas paddling trails. There's a bays map, there's a lake finder, and a river guide. So with that river guide as well too, it will give you where the Texas paddling trails are and the access points. So all of that is on our website, as well as, let's get to the beautiful part. So Texas state parks, why do we do all this? Why do we have all the employees that help protect water? And this is why. These are sites. I reached out to regional interpretive specialists and I said, what's your favorite water site? So these are all water sites that are absolutely beautiful. There's Fort Parker, and a lot of them, because we talk about cultural and natural resources and conserving that, Fort Parker is really important cultural base. Inks Lake State Park, you'll see that gorgeous water. There's the dam that's there. Waco Tanks, that one's got the pictographs as well too, so that brings in the cultural as well as all the water resources. Mustang Island, you have the coast, and then you have the bays. Palmetto State Park, absolute beautiful wetlands with the dwarf palmettos that are there, and of course the cypress based out of Caddo Lake State Park, and all the wildlife that it helps support. So that is about 3,000 employees' jobs all put together in about 10 to 15 minute presentation. So if you wanted to contact me, there is the conservation edu at tpwd.texas.gov. You can reach out to that one, and then water education as well too is where you can find a lot of our water education resources. So thank you so much for having us speak about with Texas Parks and Wildlife.
Thank you, Melissa. Super insightful. And if you have any questions for Melissa about all the things that she touched on really briefly, Texas State Parks, water resource education, please drop them in the chat. We'll also provide all of those links post-webinar as well for easy access. And next up is Ben Jones with Texas Conservation Alliance. So pass it over to you, Ben.
Thanks so much, Taylor. And thanks everyone for your time today. It's so good to be here with my colleagues on the panel and to see so many of you out there. And I recognize many of your names and know what you're doing for wildlife and for conservation across the state. And I just want to say thank you for that. It really refills the well, and it's so incredible to be part of this conservation community with you. We're getting it done in a collective way, all of us working together across the state, and that's really exciting. I'm with the Texas Conservation Alliance. You know, Melissa's got 3,000 people there with Texas Parks and Wildlife, and we have 3. So kind of a different sort of group in wildlife conservation, but all working towards the same thing. Again, I'm with Texas Conservation Alliance, and hope you can see the slide there. Let me see if this will help. Okay. Yeah.
Good to go.
Good deal. And the Texas Conservation Alliance is the state affiliate of the National Wildlife Federation, which is the country's largest wildlife conservation organization. So Texas Conservation Alliance has been around for 50 years, and we're so proud of our work so far. Over those years, we've been able to protect and preserve about 250,000 acres of land in the state for wildlife and for future Texans to enjoy. And our mission is to educate Texans and to build alliances to enhance and sustain wildlife habitat, to protect our air, our land, and our water for future generations. And our focus then, and that essence of that mission, is to focus on habitat and wildlife habitat. And that's important because habitat loss is the #1 threat to wildlife today. It's critical that we focus on habitat. When we think of wildlife conservation, a natural kind of second thought is habitat conservation. We believe that habitat conservation is wildlife conservation. In this era, this geological era, some call the Anthropocene, is distinguished by profound human influence on the earth. Few places remain where people haven't tread. Just 100 years ago, only 15% of the Earth's landmass was used for agriculture or other human uses. And today, excluding Antarctica, 77% of the Earth's landmass has been altered for human use. So our open spaces are contracting, and we're modifying the Earth in significant ways, and that's resulting into another term that people are using these days called the sixth great extinction, where extinction rates of our wildlife are up to 1,000 times the natural rate. A lot of that, the driving force, is the loss of habitat. According to the National Forest Service, we lose about 6,000 acres of open space a day. That's about 3 acres a minute. And Texas has one of the highest conversion rates in the whole country. We've got an amazing popular state, and folks are moving in, and we've got an incredible economy, and that's driving the conversion rate. So we've got to be looking out for wildlife habitat, and we've got to protect it and restore it everywhere we can. Habitat loss and degradation, again, are the #1 threat to wildlife in Texas. According to the UN, the top 5 threats are habitat loss on land and sea, direct exploitation like poaching and the illegal wildlife trade, that's #2. Climate change is ranked as #3 as one of the third leading threat to wildlife today. #4 is pollution of various sources. And #5 is listed by the UN as invasive or alien species, invasive species problems. So it's essential we advocate for wildlife habitat in our state. So along those lines, I'm suggesting we should go forth with maybe 4 different ways. If we all working together can address these 4 things in our state, I think we'll make a huge step forward when it comes to saving and protecting wildlife. So the first one is, let's protect our Texas rivers. Not only their water quantities through water conservation, but also water quality through controlling sources of non-point source litter pollution and other things like this picture featured here. On this day on the Trinity River, working with a big group of folks, we were able to remove about 1,300 pounds of litter pollution. Texas Parks and Wildlife identifies 15 major rivers in Texas and about 3,700 named streams. And in the middle of this drought period right now, especially in the west and in the south part of our state, some of our rivers and streams are at their lowest flow levels that have been recorded in many, many years. So water conservation is essential. It's essential we conserve water. There's really no room for waste. And so the tips that have been brought forth previously in the discussion about being careful with our landscape watering and even turning off the water when we brush our teeth, those are really essential to reduce our needs for water. It's important that we keep our water quality as clean as possible, but too, because our whole state and all the river systems in it are part of the Gulf of Mexico watershed. Everything that's entering those rivers, creeks, and streams, litter pollution wise, eventually ends up in our Gulf of Mexico. So anytime we can pick up litter, it's a huge help. In fact, I thought I'd list some specific things for helping to protect and restore our Texas rivers. And some specific suggestions are, how about picking up 10 pieces of litter pollution every Tuesday? There was a water group in North Texas here that was promoting that for a long time. And I thought that's really specific and something we can all think about. You might think, well, 10 pieces isn't a big deal, but remember, we're going for collective action here. So, well, how many Tuesdays are there in a year? Probably, what, 50, 52 or so. So 10 pieces. So you're already up over 500 pieces of litter pollution removed from wildlife habitat. every year. And remember, even when litter pollution is found on the street or in a parking lot or anything that, you know how a watershed works. When rain hits our area, it's going to flow and all of that stuff down into the nearest water body. And those water bodies, creeks and streams and storm drains, all flow into the nearest river and then eventually into the Gulf of Mexico. So essentially, litter pollution out anywhere is going to be potentially a degrading wildlife habitat. So it's important that we keep it out of wildlife habitat everywhere we can. Also, as was mentioned by other speakers here on our panel, particularly Andrea, native plants are incredible when it comes to water quality and water conservation. Native plants have deep root systems, they absorb water, and they take a lot less water than other plants do in our area. So that's really one great way to protect and restore Texas rivers. And you might not have thought of that, but using native plants will help do that. And then thirdly, set a personal goal for yourself, as Melissa was referencing when it comes to water use. How about maybe watching your water bills and then seeing if you can reduce your personal consumption by 20%. That will be a huge help to Texas rivers and to wildlife habitat in general. Let me just share quickly when we save water, I never put these pieces together before in my mind. And I've been in wildlife conservation for 20 something years. But when we save water, we're saving wildlife habitat. And I never was able to connect the dots before. I had heard it before, but I never thought of it. When we have to build a new reservoir, we have to flood tens of thousands of acres of land, sometimes beautiful endangered prairies, sometimes forest and urban hardwood bottomland forests. And then of course there's the river system itself that's significantly impacted. When we reduce consumption, we mitigate the need for additional reservoirs. We can focus on water recycling. We can focus on other strategies that give us, especially in urban centers, the water that we need, but then still protect the wildlife habitat. And we don't have to flood out tens of thousands and lose all those acres of wildlife habitat just by being careful with our water use and trying to conserve water wherever possible. One particular approach to this is the North Texas Municipal Water District John Bucker Sands Wetland Project, which is so amazing. A water recycling and reuse program up here in North Texas that not only filters an incredible amount of water for our region, but also provides some of the best wildlife habitat, and it's particularly birds, some of the best birding habitat in our region. So those two things can go hand in hand. Number two, let's protect our Texas prairies. That is our most endangered ecosystem. There used to be 240 million acres of prairie stretching across the United States right down through the center. But after over 100 years of agricultural conversion, less than 1% of our prairie land remains. Our grasslands are disappearing faster than any other sort of ecosystem. So you can imagine what that does to prairie wildlife. All those animals that have co-evolved with that ecosystem or were designed to live there, they're in trouble without a home. So the more we can do to restore prairie ecosystems in our region, the better. Again, less than 1% remains. It's all of our job to try to restore prairie land to Texas wherever we can, and to include as many people like you see here in this photo as possible in the work. At Texas Conservation Alliance, we believe that doing leads to caring. So we really try to lead with the doing aspect. It's kind of a riff off of the quote by Aristotle, which said that, people become builders by building. And if you think about it, we believe that conservationists become conservationists by conserving, or a person becomes a land steward or a wildlife steward by being engaged and involved in stewardship. So it seems pretty straightforward, but we try to lead with the action, and then the caring follows the action. So again, doing leads to caring. Let's all work together to plant native plants and protect and restore Texas prairies across our state. Number three, let's protect our Texas forests. They're amazing. Somebody asked somebody at Scientific American, the magazine, what is the most powerful and productive climate change mitigation technology out there. And he said it's not a technology at all. It's reforestation at scale. So we can work together to plant our forests. We're planting longleaf pines here down in the Big Thicket National Preserve in Southeast Texas. You know what planting trees does? So many great things. Cleans our air, cleans our water, holds our water, absorbs carbon like at an incredible rate, and provides habitat for endangered species such as the red cockaded woodpecker that lives down in this region. Let's work together to protect and restore our Texas forests. Number 4, and this one might be a surprise to you, but our Texas night sky is wildlife habitat. When you think of wildlife migrations, if you're like me, you know, you think of Africa and the great wildebeest migrations. You might think of the Arctic region and caribou migrations, but our Texas night sky is critical migratory habitat. About 70% of bird species, a little bit more actually, that migrate, they migrate at night. They're nocturnal migrants. So if you're like me, I never thought of the night sky as wildlife habitat, but it is critical, crucial wildlife habitat. Some nights, every spring and fall during peak migration, we've got hundreds of millions of birds soaring through our Texas night sky. While we're laying down asleep, they're pouring through, and our skies are like super highways for migratory birds. So we've got to protect our night skies and restore them as best as we can by limiting light pollution. Now, the reason we're so important, and I know you're like me, I know Texas is the most important, and we have plenty to brag about. And another thing you might not have realized is our place in the Central Flyway. You can see that illustrated here. Texas anchors the Central Flyway, which is like this invisible migratory route across North America, actually all the way down through the whole hemisphere. And so what happens in Texas when it comes to bird migration is incredibly consequential to the rest of the hemisphere. So what we need to take action and restore our night skies with darkness, because birds are attracted to light. You can see here, some birds fly over the Gulf of Mexico. You can see them launch from the Yucatan, and then they pour into Texas across the Gulf of Mexico. Even the ruby-throated hummingbird does that, and that is a 17-hour nonstop flight over the Gulf. It's a trans-Gulf migrant. So you can imagine the water that it needs when it lands back in Texas, flying over in the spring, and then and the food that it needs. We sometimes say we want to be like a Buc-ee's for migrating birds. We want to be a place to rest, to refuel, to get water, to drink water, you know, even to use the restroom. We need our state to be a place for these migratory birds that's safe and that helps them along their way for those that are traveling further north. Here's an image of our Texas night sky. There was a study in 2019 that came out that showed that Houston was the city that exposed the most number of birds because of its place in the geography and because of all of its developed city there. The city that exposed the most number of birds to the most amount of artificial light. Chicago was number 2, and the Dallas-Fort Worth region was ranked number 3. So 1, 2, and 3 of these cities out of the 125 most populated cities in the United States. So again, light pollution attracts birds down from high altitude. You can see some of the altitudes listed here by this Cornell graphic. Whenever they're attracted out of their migratory elevations, they're exposed to danger. And so they often collide with buildings or power lines or communication towers, as you see some of the numbers featured here. So it's important for us to go lights out as best we can. These are some of the birds we found in downtown Dallas. And to make our night skies, particularly during peak migration, as dark as possible for migratory birds. It affects not just migratory birds like pollution, but it's a sensory pollutant that affects a number of taxa of wildlife. So it's best if we can restore our night skies. You can do that by going lights out for wildlife. We just ask for everyone to go lights out, all non-essential lighting out from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. during peak migration. These are some of the actions you can take. You can go online and certify your home, building, school campus, place of worship as Lights Out for Wildlife and Bird Friendly, and you'll receive a certificate that celebrates your commitment to restoring the night sky for birds. So in summary, let's protect our rivers, our prairies, our forests. Let's protect and restore our Texas night sky. And when we do that, we're going to be conserving wildlife. When you take action on any of those fronts, you become part of the greatest wildlife recovery in Texas history, which we're all working for. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you for touching on all those actions that folks can take. And, you know, conservation doesn't have to be this overwhelming task. As Melissa mentioned, just take small, you know, the small steps that you can take, whether that's, you know, reducing your water usage by, you know, turning off your faucet while you're brushing your teeth, or shortening your showers, or, you know, as Andrea touched on, planting native plants. So just take, you know, the steps that you can at a time, and, you know, get there, and we can all be stewards of Texas's natural resources. And that summarizes today's presentations, but we're going to stay on. We have 7 minutes left to answer any questions that you have. So please drop those in the Q&A if you have them, and we'll get them answered. But to kick it off, I know all of our presenters touched on, you know, a lot of actions that we can take, but wanted to recap that and just ask each of the speakers, what is one thing that an individual, or, you know, in particular a business, could take away from today's presentations to get involved in stewarding Texas's land, water, or wildlife? And I will, if Andrea, if you want to go first, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, I think from my perspective, I would just say simply plant more native plants. And, you know, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. You know, if you have an existing landscape, just start using more plants that are native to your region. And it'll benefit wildlife and water conservation, and it'll help you connect more with the natural world too.
Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah. Ben touched on it. Definitely litter pickup. Litter pickup can be done anywhere you go. If you recreate, just laying in your front yard, backyard, in a river, floating, whether it's your trash or somebody else's, pick that up, because that all goes into the waterways, into the river systems. Grass clippings, don't put those down the drain. You know, pick those up, put them in your composting bin and things like that. So I would say trash pickup would be my number one.
Thank you. And Sven, I know you touched on a lot, but if you want to touch on maybe some things that you would love to see businesses in Texas do, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people don't think of the night sky and light pollution as a potential, well, as a pollutant. You know, we don't think of light that way at night. I've seen so many bugs zipping around and swarming around street lamps. You know, like I said, I've been in conservation for 20 years, and I don't know why I never clicked how disruptive that can be to ecological, you know, of all ecological things of all types, wildlife and their reproductive cycles and their, you know, hunting strategies and everything. So non-essential lighting, which everyone decides what's essential and not essential for their own buildings, but non-essential lighting off from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., particularly through peak spring and fall migration. I think it's a simple fix. It can save a lot of energy. So it's kind of a win-win, and it's going to really help a lot of wildlife too.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, and conservation is typically always a win-win for business. So Ben mentioned saving energy, which saves money. Native plants can do the same for companies as well. So as folks are working to retrofit fixtures at their business, or design new landscapes, or, you know, go through their portfolio and see how can we save more money, conservation is always a great way to do that. We did have a question in the chat about lighting. So how can we reconcile night lighting with lighting to stop crime? And Ben, if you want to answer that, or I can answer it as well, whatever works for you.
Just quickly, I would say there are studies that show that too much light can backfire in a glare kind of way. So sometimes we say just more, but actually it can limit visibility with too much light through glare. I know the International Dark Sky Association have shown studies that, so just it's not more light all the time, so we want to be careful with it. But again, everyone decides what's essential lighting. So certain areas may be essentially lit through the night, and everyone chooses that. But light that's cast down, light that's more on the red side of the spectrum or warm spectrum or yellows, warms are better for wildlife as well. So there are a number of ways. Taylor, you may add more.
Yeah, just to add to that, it isn't about turning off all light. So it's pitch black. It's using dark sky friendly lighting. So as Ben mentioned, pointing it down so it's not shining up into the sky where it's not being used and not needed and not technically protecting property if it's shown into the sky anyways. Ben mentioned it as well, but International Dark Sky Association has some great resources on this. So if you're looking or wanting to make your home dark skies friendly, they have a resource guide of fixtures that point that light down or have shielding. So great for that as well. There's another question in the chat. What are Texas state incentives or expanding prairie and forest areas? And I'm not sure if we need elaboration on that or.
Yeah, so Texas Parks and Wildlife actually has grants for wildlife habitat management grants and landowner incentive programs as well too. So if you just type in TPWD landowner incentive programs, a lot of those come up, and there's resources as well on how to whatever eco region you're in, it will provide that information for expanding prairies and forested areas as well.
Thank you, Melissa. And I know some of the other state agencies in Texas have incentive programs for landowners as well, like NRCS or AgriLife. So lots of resources out there if you're looking for incentives or matching programs or things like that. We have about 2 minutes left. Any other questions from folks in the audience? Well, I know we're about a minute. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to say, because one of the other questions is migration. And so Ben, I wasn't quite sure if you answered that one in your presentation. There's 2 migrations, spring and fall. And so it may shift a little different, but Ben, did you have that in your presentation on migration? Because there's spring and fall.
Yeah,
I don't know
it
the
does
exact
shift.
dates and stuff.
Yeah, particularly peak migration. But if you want to remember it generally, which you can count on, fall migration is September, October, November. It's a really 3-month. I mean, it goes a little wider than that, but those are the hard. September, October, November. Spring is March, April, May. So those are your 6 months that you really want to focus on lights out if you can. Get into a routine, maybe just do it year round, even better. But those 6 months.
Yeah, that would be ideal for folks to go lights out all year long and just participate in conservation all year long as well, as folks touch on collective